Welcome back, everyone, to some more historical trivia. This is one that was actually sent to me and suggested as being a good one to cover because the person who sent it to me said that while it's a topic that's right in my wheelhouse, the American Civil War, they said it wasn't just really just simply surfacey level stuff, that there was actually some depth in some of the questions. So I thought it'd be interesting. You guys seem to really enjoy when we do these trivia ones. I'll add this to the playlist. So how it typically works, if you're new to the channel, or if you haven't seen me do one of these before, is we'll watch the trivia. I'll answer the question as quickly as I can. We'll see how you do against me. But then I'll pause here and there to talk a little bit more in depth about the topic. So it's not just trivia, but it's a chance to cover a variety of different topics related to the questions that are asked. So I'll put the link down in the description. This is from Answer This. This one's American Civil War. Only true history buffs can ace this Civil War quiz. I want to give a shout out, a thank you to Steven Sanders for your support on Patreon. Thank you so much, Steven. Let's dive into this one. All right, let's do it. So 20 questions. I'm assuming they mean 10 seconds for each of the 20 questions. All right, so this is Richmond. We'll try to get these before the choices come up. Atlanta falls in September of 1864. Vicksburg famously surrenders July 4th of 1863. So Richmond falls in April 65. It really should have fallen in 1862. If a potato had been in command of the Army of the Potomac, is what I like to say, then Richmond would have fallen in 62. So that one's pretty easy, by and large, compared to what I expect some of these will be. So there are a lot. This is Andersonville. I got to do these faster instead of waiting. Andersonville. I'm not sure about Victorville or Atlanta being prisons. Some of the other famous prisons, Libby Prison in Richmond, was originally for officers, Union officers, but eventually held enlisted men as well. Andersonville is the notorious one. There were some notorious northern prisons as well. Elmira, New York, in particular, was pretty brutal as far as the number of deaths that happened. But Confederate troops were held at Camp Douglas in Chicago. You have Camp Chase in Ohio that originally was for training Union soldiers and then becomes a prison camp. You have Johnson's Island up on Lake Erie in northern Ohio. You've got Fort Delaware. There's a bunch of other ones. All right, try to be faster this time instead of waiting. First seceded from the Union, South Carolina in December of 1860. And Tennessee actually comes right at the end later on. So there were what were called the Cotton States, which were the Deep South states. So you're talking about South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Arkansas. Was Arkansas even? Yeah, I think they were. It's only after Fort Sumter that you get, maybe that's when Arkansas was, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia. South Carolina was always one of the more radical states in the South. After Battle of Antietam, we go to Burnside, which is fascinating because at the Battle of Antietam was not Burnside's finest moment. He's in command of the troops at the southern end of the battlefield, and they famously have a difficult time getting across the bridge that's now known as Burnside Bridge. And I don't think that Burnside necessarily did terribly in command of the army. He was hampered by some bad logistics that weren't really his fault. He had a decent plan that resulted in the Battle of Fredericksburg. It just, a lot of stuff went against him. He had a serious degree of mutiny going on among his subordinates. But Burnside never felt himself qualified for the job of the Army of the Potomac either. At that point, after the Battle of Antietam, Grant and Sherman are out west. Grant is in command of a department in West Tennessee and then into Mississippi. Sherman is under him, commanding one of his corps. All right, what's next? So far, so good. What state saw the most battles during the Civil War? It's got to be Virginia, just because there's so much fighting that happens between the area between Washington, D.C. and Richmond, as those main armies of the Eastern Theater are attempting to fight over Richmond. Northern Democrats were Copperheads. The head of the Copperheads is a guy named Clement Vallandigham, who is a congressman born in Lisbon, Ohio, so like 20 miles from me, and was a congressman, a Democratic congressman, who ends up being arrested initially, I think, on orders of Burnside, who commanded the Department of the Ohio, and then Lincoln, who did not order his arrest, despite what some people say, did not approve of him being arrested, but did approve of him being exiled to the Confederacy. I think he ended up in Canada. Ran for governor of Ohio and lost. The Union ironclad that fought the Merrimack was, well, here's the thing. It didn't fight the Merrimack. The Monitor fought the Virginia. We often call it the Monitor and the Merrimack, and that's because the Merrimack was a Union ship that was sunk as Union forces had to abandon Virginia, and it was brought up. It was salvaged and became the CSS Virginia, that ironclad, and it fought against the Monitor after having sunk a couple of Union ships the day before. Monitor was recovered. Well, the round part, they called it they talked about it like it being a cheese box on a board or something. That part of it was recovered off of Cape Hatteras not too many years ago, with the men still inside. Some of the men. Lee's right-hand man until his death was Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson. He famously said that Jackson had lost his left arm, but Lee said, "But I have lost my right." Shot by his own men. Survived the amputation of his arm, but then died of pneumonia. Fort Sumter was what Confederate general led the defense at Fort Sumter. No, you mean the offense at Fort Sumter. PGT Beauregard, Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard, was in command of the troops who fired on Fort Sumter, which was a Union fort commanded by Major Robert Anderson. It's a little confusing there. New Orleans. Well, that's interesting. It was a Navy commander. Yeah, it wasn't a Union general. It was David Farragut. So Frederick Dent is Ulysses S. Grant's brother-in-law. So he wasn't a Union general. It's David Farragut. He was at the time he would have been a flag officer. Later, Admiral Farragut when they created the position of admiral. But yeah, he not a general. And yeah, New Orleans, largest city in the Confederacy by far. I think Charleston, South Carolina, was the second largest city in the Confederacy, and it was like a fourth the size of New Orleans. New Orleans falls without any army at all. It falls to the Navy. Final major Confederate port in the Gulf of Mexico would have been Mobile, Alabama, which falls in 1964, again to the Navy. This is, I believe, where you get the very famous line from, I think it was Farragut, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." Torpedoes being mines at the time, not torpedoes the way we think of them today. Clara Barton. She was, there's actually a memorial to her at the Antietam battlefield. She was there in the aftermath of the Battle of Antietam helping to treat wounded soldiers. Florence Nightingale is famous for the Crimean War, which was a decade or so earlier than that. John C. Pemberton, not to be confused with the one who created Coca-Cola. John C. Pemberton was a favorite of Jefferson Davis. He had no business being in command of the defenses of one of the most vital cities in the Confederacy, and to top it all off, because of this is one of the great downfalls for the South in the American Civil War, is the way Jefferson Davis played favorites. Now, Davis is not a novice when it comes to the military. He was a West Point graduate. He had been Secretary of War. He had actually, I think, been commandant of West Point at one point. So he knows his stuff, at least on paper. But he was terrible with playing favorites, and that meant that he would put people in positions they didn't have any business being in, like Braxton Bragg and John C. Pemberton. It meant that he would not give favor to guys that even Union generals thought were pretty good, guys like Joe Johnston, and it really hurt the Confederacy. Of course, Lincoln did some of that too. All right, I don't even know how far we are. We're number 14. Cold Harbor. Well, it depends on how you mean led. I mean, overall command of all Union armies is Grant. Meade is in command of the army that's fighting at Cold Harbor. But really, if we're going to lay blame, I think, on anyone at Cold Harbor, it should be on the corps commanders there. Guys like Wright, who really just failed in their job to understand exactly what they were being ordered to do and the ground over which they were being ordered to attack. But Grant, ultimately, McClellan's out of the army at this point. Joe Hooker is commanding troops in the Western Theater at that point, ends up commanding an army in the West. And people forget that about Hooker. Hooker, he resigns from command of the Army of the Potomac, but he does continue to serve, and I think do a fairly good job in the Western Theater. This is going to be Rose O'Neal Greenhow, who probably helped the Confederates win the Battle of Bull Run. She ended up drowning like a year later. But fascinating story. The spy stuff from the Civil War doesn't get talked about enough. What Southern state was last to rejoin the Union? Ooh, this is a tricky one. I think it was Georgia. I want to say it was Georgia. Any of these could be, though. I could be wrong on this one. I think it's Georgia. Yeah, okay, cool. Don't ask me. Early 1870s, I think. Who replaced Simon Cameron? So Simon Cameron was the governor of Pennsylvania going into the election of 1860. And you have a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff going on for the nomination, the Republican nomination. This is only the second time the Republicans are running a candidate for president. They had run John C. Fremont in 1856. He loses to Buchanan. Going into this convention, you have guys like Salmon Chase of Ohio. You have, I think it was Edward Bates in Missouri. And you have Seward out of New York. And these are kind of the front runners. And then below them, you have this kind of second-tier candidate in Abraham Lincoln, who had risen to national prominence after his debates with Douglas for the Senate seat in Illinois. And then he had given some prominent speeches, things like the Cooper Union Address in New York City, that had put him on the map. And so when they're trying to figure out who the nominee is going to be in 1860, all these promises are being made and asked for, and Lincoln is trying really hard not to give any outright promises, but it's pretty well understood that the Pennsylvania delegation going for Lincoln is owed in no small part to Simon Cameron, the governor, and he expects something in return. So even though I think a lot of people did not feel he was qualified to be Secretary of War, he gets the job and performs very poorly in it. So he gets replaced in 1862 by a fellow Northeastern Ohioan, Edwin Stanton, who had been a Democrat before the war. So Seward was Secretary of State. Salmon Chase was Secretary of the Treasury. I love Ohio. I'm an Ohioan. I'm proud to be an Ohioan. I brag about Ohio all the time. I cannot stand Salmon Chase, and he's from Ohio. Just not a person I like at all. And I just think the whole time he was in the cabinet, he's undermining Lincoln. He's looking out for himself. And finally, Lincoln gets a chance to dump him. And he puts him in the Supreme Court instead, makes him Chief Justice. But highly recommend Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. You can learn all about these guys. That said, Stanton, and especially Seward, I have immense respect for. I love Seward. He, in reading that book, became one of my favorite people from that time period. All right, where are we at? On to number 18. First all African American regiment to see combat. All right, this one is, I know the answer they're going to go for here, which is the 54th Massachusetts. That's debatable. You had other all African American regiments, and none of them were all African American because they had white officers. But there were other black regiments that had already seen combat by the time the 54th even came into being. You have the 2nd Kansas Colored Regiment, for example. You have Louisiana regiments. You have African-American soldiers fighting at places like Milliken's Bend. So I know they want the 54th Massachusetts here, but that's not who it is. 21st New Jersey, 27th Ohio, those are not black regiments. Eventually, most of the black soldiers who fight are going to serve in what are called the U.S. Colored Troops. 55th Massachusetts is also a black regiment. Marie's Heights at Fredericksburg, that would have been James Longstreet was in overall command. Stonewall Jackson's on the right flank of the Confederate Army at Fredericksburg. Longstreet's on the left. Pretty easy job for Longstreet at Fredericksburg. All right. Which Pennsylvania town was briefly occupied? This is going to be Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Well, Chambersburg, Carlisle, Gettysburg, all occupied by Confederate forces in 1863. But in this case, they're talking about Chambersburg. But yeah, I mean, during the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederacy occupied the town of Gettysburg because the Union forces had been pushed through town and were in position south of town. But Chambersburg, yeah, that's the next town to the west of Gettysburg. Burned in 1864 by Jubal Early. All right. That was fun. Let's keep it going. Let's do some Revolutionary War trivia. See, I guarantee I'm not going to get all of these right. So let's see if you can beat me on this one. So the first one already came up. Which future president was a young officer who crossed the Delaware with Washington? That is James Monroe. He was severely wounded at Trenton, nearly died if it hadn't been for the actions of a doctor in saving his life. Are we not getting? Oh, we're not going to get multiple choice on this one. So no Americans were killed or died of wounds from Trenton, but he nearly did. The Stamp Act. Yeah, so anything like printed materials had to be stamped. You had to pay for a stamp to get that on there. This is one you learn about in school growing up here in the U.S. Which secret organization formed to protest British policies? All is the Sons of Liberty. One could argue they were a terrorist organization by today's standards. Defended British soldiers, John Adams. One of the things I love about John Adams, the integrity the man had. He got most of them off, too. There were a couple of minor charges, but nothing major. But he defended these guys, despite being a patriot himself. First direct tax imposed on the American colonies by the Parliament. Oh, gosh. See, we learn about like the Intolerable Acts and the... is this a sugar tax? Sugar Act of 1764. Okay. I was on the right track. Close enough. Who wrote the influential pamphlet Common Sense? That was Thomas Paine. And then he wrote another one later at the end of the year called Our American Crisis, which famously begins with the line, "These are the times that try men's souls." Not a great dude, Thomas Paine. He's one of those great examples of a super influential man who definitely had a big part to play in the cause of American liberty, but wasn't necessarily a stand-up guy himself. Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. That's the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was fought on Breed's Hill outside of Boston. Bunker Hill was actually further behind the American position. British captured what American city in 1776? New York City. Yeah, I mean, right at the time that the Declaration of Independence is being adopted, New York City is falling to the British, and they hold it the rest of the war till 1783 when it's turned back over. Turning point of the revolution would be Saratoga, where one of the heroes of that battle was Benedict Arnold before he became a traitor. This is the battle, the news of which brings France into the war, and without France, the U.S. doesn't win the war. It's a big, big, big deal. Commander of French forces assisting Rochambeau. The code word was Rochambeau. Dig me? Yeah, the Comte de Rochambeau. For final major battle of the American Revolution. I mean, are we saying again? Are we talking about Yorktown? Yorktown's fascinating. Really cool place to visit. There were battles after this. My sixth great-grandfather, who, as it turns out, I share that ancestor with the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. We are both descended from Lieutenant James Felix McGuire, who was killed at the Battle of Blue Licks, Kentucky in 1782. This was after Yorktown. John Laurens, from the Hamilton musical, famously dies after Yorktown. What colony was last to sign the Declaration of Independence? Last to sign. I don't know who was last to sign, but New York initially abstained when the 13 colonies voted. 12 voted in favor of independence. New York abstained because they hadn't gotten permission from their constituent assembly back in New York to vote for independence. They did vote later. So I'm assuming that's who they mean, because I don't know who signed last, because the signing happens in a lot of people get all this confused. So the timeline, July 2nd, the motion to declare independence is adopted by the Continental Congress. And so that's why John Adams writes home to his wife Abigail, talking about how July 2nd is going to be celebrated with fireworks and parades and all this stuff, because he feels like that's the date, right? You know, July 2nd, they voted for independence. But the final wording of the Declaration of Independence, which is giving the reasons for that vote, is adopted on July 4th. And that's why you see the date at the top in Congress, July 4th, 1776. Now, the document that was signed by the delegates, the first signings don't happen until August 2nd, because they had to order the copy that they were going to sign. They had to have it made. And so they order it, they have it made. The first signing happens on August 2nd, but not all the signings are on August 2nd. That's a long way to say that I think what they meant was who adopted it last. Who negotiated the Treaty of Alliance with France? Benjamin Franklin. I don't know if John Adams, I think John Adams was over there then too, but Franklin was the main guy. Interesting dude, Benjamin Franklin. The Treaty of Paris, one of many treaties of Paris. This one was in 1783. A lot of treaties of Paris over time. There was one that ended the Vietnam War, and there have been ones that have ended other wars. The name of the spy ring. Oh, this was the Culper Ring. Highly recommend. Turn, Washington's Spies. TV show is a slightly fictionalized version that has a lot of main stuff right about the Culper Ring, but there's a book that was written that the TV show is based on that is fantastic about the Culper Ring. Famous naval commander declared, "I have not yet begun to fight." Well, this has got to be John Paul Jones, right? Scottish. I think his name was actually John Paul, and then the Jones was added. The first constitution of the United States was called the Constitution. What we had before that was the Articles of Confederation, which was not a constitution. It was an Articles of Confederation. I get what they're coming after here, though. Was not great. Didn't work very well. What term describes African private ships? Author, privateers, or American private ships. And these aren't uniquely American. This happened, many countries had privateers. It was basically a way to have a navy without having a navy, where you incentivize private people with ships to go to war for you, basically. What general replaced General Howe as commander of British forces in America in 1778? That would have been Clinton. So you go from Gage to Howe to Clinton. And Clinton kind of hangs Cornwallis out to dry at Yorktown. American traitor, we talked about this already a little bit. That's Benedict Arnold. He was in command at the fort at West Point, tries to turn it over to the British. His go-between was John Andre, the Adjutant General of the British Army, who gets hanged for his efforts because he gets captured. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. Check out, pinned in the comment section below, I'll have all of my other trivia, the whole trivia playlist if you want to check out some of the other videos. Stephen Wood and Aiden Reese, thank you both so much for your support on Patreon. We'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.